Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, muli muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Today, our Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, Jennifer Swanson, is returning to share some great advice for all of the authors listening to the show. Jennifer has a wealth of advice and information and knowledge that all authors can benefit from. Probably one of the things, I don't think she says it in the interview, but I think she'd agree with me that one of the things that you should do if you are an author or an aspiring author is to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Jennifer did that. She was one of the first guests on our show. She went to readingwithyourkids.com and clicked on the Authors Click Here button, and she discovered how she could be a guest here on the podcast. Oh, she also was one of the first people to submit her book to our Certified Great Read panel. Her book absolutely earned 5 stars, and it became one of our very first Certified Great Reads. Oh, and Jennifer has also taken part in our monthly promotion program. We've helped celebrate Jennifer's books through commercials here on the podcast, messages to our 100,000 plus social media followers, and we've had her books on display at whatever live event we've been at in a particular month. Hey, if Jennifer Swanson found it helpful to go to readingwithyourkids.com and clicking on that Authors Click Here button, I think you benefit from it too. Do it today. Readingwithyourkids.com and click on that Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Joining us once again from Jacksonville in Florida, our guest is our Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, the Admiral of Adventure, Jennifer Swanson. Hey, Jen, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. Thanks so much for having me. I always love having a conversation with you because we have so much fun.
I agree. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because while we recently talked about your debut picture book, Footprints Across the Planet, and we've talked about so many of your other nonfiction science-based books, today we're talking about the business of books. And I think that that's so important. We have so many authors who listen to the show. We have so many parents who are aspiring to turn some of the stories that they're telling their kids into books. And so I think it's really important to have somebody like you who's been very successful, and you haven't written the same number of books as Jane Yolen. You're not up at the 400
No, I have not.
But you've written, I think it's 50 books now?
I just signed the contract on my 50th book. Yay!
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, first, I want to hear how you got into writing STEM-based nonfiction books.
Oh, well, that's actually kind of a funny story. So I decided that I wanted to be a writer. I had journals my whole life and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought I'd start with a fiction picture book because they're easy, right? They're like, I see you laughing. They're so easy to write. I was like, I can totally do this. So I write this book, this little fiction picture book. It was called like Popsicle Pete the Frozen Penguin or something like that, right? And I was like, it was about a penguin who so it's funny because it was fiction, but I didn't realize there was a lot of nonfiction elements in it because it was kind of based on a real story about this penguin. I think it was at the San Diego Zoo, who lost his feathers because he got an illness, and so they put a little life jacket on him. And I was like, that's so cute. So I write this picture book and I take it to my first conference, right? And I'm like, okay, here we go, right? And I get a critique. with like this, her name was Elaine Landau. She was an amazing nonfiction author, which I didn't know. And she looks at it, and anybody who's been through a critique knows, like, it's very nerve-wracking. This is like your heart that you're giving them. And she reads it, and she goes, you know, I mean, it was pretty good. But I'm wondering, do you do anything else? I was like, yeah, right. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst. That's it. My career is over. Right? I mean, who wants a critiquer to say that? Ask you if you do anything else. I was like, well, this is not a very auspicious start. But what she said was, there's a lot of science in this. Do you like science? Now, what do you think, Jed? Do I think science?
I know, knowing that you started the science club at your school in the back of your father's garage, or blew up your father's garage doing some science experiments. I know that science is in your blood.
Yes, exactly. But I will say this, it never occurred to me until she asked me, do I like science? And then she proceeds to explain to me about how you can write nonfiction science books. And she had to assure me that they weren't the boring books that you and I read as kids, that they were really amazing books. And then all of a sudden it like dawned on me, you mean I can write about things that I love? Okay, this is going to be cool. And that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. That's a much better result. When you were talking about the critique, I had a flashback to when I was in college, and asked one of my English professors to read a short story that I had written. And when I saw him the next week or whatever, and I asked him what he thought, he goes, so do you want me to tell you what I think or what you want to hear? And I go,
oh. That's also not a good thing to hear.
And I don't know what expression came over my face. He told me he really liked it, but I didn't believe him.
Yeah, that's never a good thing when people do that. Mm-hmm. But that's the thing I think a lot of writers should understand. You can write what you love. And sometimes when you do, that's when the most of your passion and your excitement comes out. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're going to talk about a little more. You also, if you want to be a trade author or work for educational publishers, you have to be able to sell it. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes is a lot harder than you think it is.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad that you are reinforcing a message that Jane Yolen and Jerry Spinelli and a number of other authors,
right.
You hear, I always heard, write what you know.
Yes.
Write what you've experienced. And you and Jane and Jerry and others have all said, nah, write what you love.
Yes.
Because that's when you're going to, I think that's when the passion is going to hit the page.
Absolutely. And especially if we're going to talk about nonfiction, because nonfiction, thankfully, is really exciting and dynamic these days, or should be, mm-hmm. right? And kids get all of these amazing books that they can read about all of these different topics, but they're not the books that you and I grew up with, which were basically little more than textbooks and very just informational, like this happened and this happened. It gets them to think, like, could you be an engineer that creates a self-driving car someday? Mm-hmm. You know, that's what these books are supposed to do. And if that's what you love, then I think that's what you'll find in your books. And I think that's what people find when I write my books, is I have a lot of excitement and energy that I bring to the books, and get kids curious about them. Mm-hmm.
How do you think, and I want to talk a little bit more about that passion, putting the passion on the page. But I want to know how we got to the point where, when you and I were younger, people thought the way books should be is boring. Because that was never the way human beings learned. You know, human beings, before the written word, human beings learned through stories. And the stories, the parables, they weren't boring.
No.
They were exciting, and that's how we learned. That's how information was shared. And then suddenly, at some point, people said, "Yeah, all right, let's knock out this fun stuff." I mean, I in 1989, I created a disabilities awareness video that featured magic and dancing and songs and a really strong, powerful message.
Right.
And one of the most celebrated school systems here in Massachusetts previewed it to possibly show to their kids. And the critique that I got back is, love the message, really well done. We're not going to use it. It's too much fun. I didn't even realize that rhymed.
It does rhyme.
But I mean, it was like, I just went like, that. All right, that doesn't compute.
I mean, I think the mentality was that nonfiction especially should be approached with an educational bent in mind. So, and even before, like now, they have all of the curriculum standards and all of these things, but they've always had guidelines for teaching. And I think since textbooks were used in the classroom to get messages across, and there's specific uses for textbooks, I'm not against textbooks. There's a certain reason why they're taught that way. But when kids are trying to read for fun, I think that didn't necessarily translate over. And I mean, I don't know, I wasn't writing at this time, but what I'm guessing would be that the publishers themselves probably looked at, well, textbooks work. If we're going to sell to schools, let's give them something they already know. Right. And I couldn't put my finger on when it started changing, but now it's so different. I mean, look at all the authors you've had on your show. Melissa Stewart's books, Heather Montgomery's books, they're all amazingly out of the box, curious. And they get kids to go, like, you call me the Admiral of Adventure. Well, I hope the kids go on an adventure when they read some of my books, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what all of us nonfiction authors want to do. And that all starts with your own passion for the subject.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you mentioned Heather Montgomery, who I've named the queen of yucky science. She just has this passion for the yuck in science, which is really fun.
And Heather says, she's the one that told me that I write books that no one else wants to write because they're about really complex topics. But I have the ability to take a really complex topic and turn it into something accessible and fun. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think we all kind of get our own little niche there in what we write.
So how do we figure out what sells? I've had so many authors, especially indie authors, come on and they say, I wrote this book because I needed a book about a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who got bullied, and her name was Heather, and I went to the bookstore and I couldn't find anything like that, so I said, well, we got to write this book. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty specific, and I'm not quite sure there's a big market for that, but let's talk about it.
So I will tell you, I don't have the secret, gold bullet for that. If I did, I'd have as many books as Jane Yolen. But here's a couple of things that you can do. Look at the market, see what's out there. And learn. Here's what I do. I think like I'm a fifth grader in my head. Like I'm still I was 7 when I started the science club, but I'm still that 9 and 10-year-old kid in my head who loves science. And when I approach any of my topics, that's what I try and think about. And I think if you can find a topic that kids are interested in, and it can be obscure. I mean, I've written some somewhat obscure books, like about crash test dummies and the safety of car safety engineering. But I think what you need to do is also look at the market. You need to look at your voice and your tone and the language you're using and all those kinds of things, and then present it in an exciting way. And then there's the whole, you have to create a pitch, which we could do a whole nother talk on pitches and how you pitch and all that kind of stuff. But I think if you go out and look at what's being bought, then that might give you an idea about if this will sell. What it really needs more than anything else is a giant, what we call a hook. Like, why would anyone want to buy this? So, and I'll give you an example. So when I was researching, I did a book on electrical engineering for an educational publisher. And during that time, I learned about the self-driving car. Well, Jed, you know me. I got so excited about the self-driving car. I was like, this is the coolest technology ever, right? You and I, when we were doing the podcast, Solvent podcast, we talked to an engineer who worked on a flying car. I mean, this was like, I want to do a book on this. So I was like, great, we're going to do a book on basically, this is a self-driving car. And, I thought my proposal was really good. I showed it to my National Geographic Kids editor, and she was like, eh. Again, not the response you want. She's like, I mean, it's okay. But she's like, it's not high energy. It's not exciting. She's like, it needs a bigger hook. And I was like, okay. So one night when I was on a walk with my husband, do you remember the old crash test dummy commercials? Right? Where they're like, seatbelt, buckle up, all that stuff. So they had played one recently. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. And we're walking on a walk, and my husband says, what would be funny is he was like, if you have the crash test dummies and the seatbelts, he's like, you wouldn't really need the self-driving car. You'd be saving them. And I went, oh my gosh, that's the hook. Save the crash test dummies. So I came home, rewrote my proposal, and all of a sudden the proposal about the history of car safety engineering, snore, became save the crash test dummies, the history of car safety engineering told through the eyes of a crash test dummy. Yeah. You see the hook?
Yeah.
That is what helps you sell books.
Yeah. And that's kind of magical, what you just did. It's, hey, what do I want to write about? I want to write about the history of car safety. Yeah, it's kind of boring.
I'm sorry, you get the blank look when you say that to people.
Yeah.
Really?
But, hey, we're talking about the crash test dummies, and we look at the history of car safety through their eyes, and suddenly it's like, oh no, we're talking about crash test dummies and rolling around, and there's a funny character, and kids can relate to it. Yes. And, I'm going to learn as well? Cool.
Yes. And that's what I think you can do. So if you have a topic that you're really, really excited about, I've met many authors, come at it from a different angle. Think like a kid. Mm-hmm. And if you can think like the kid, then, I can't guarantee it's going to be bought. No one can. Mm-hmm. But that big hook, and if you can demonstrate that this is something a kid will really engage with and get excited about, that will help you to sell it.
Yeah. You mentioned finding out what's being bought. Are you talking about what's on the New York Times bestseller list, or what we're hearing through the business agents and publishers are buying?
You can look at the New York Times best-selling list. I will tell you, if you're looking for nonfiction, you're not going to find much there for kid-lit nonfiction. There's amazing fiction books there, and that'll help you if you're looking for fiction books or whatever. Hang out at your local library. Talk to the librarians. Go to the independent booksellers. Scroll through Amazon. I know everyone's like, but I'm sorry, but they sell tons of books, and they have almost everyone out there. And try and see, what their rankings are. Look at the comments at the bottom. I don't do that for all the books, but when I have an idea for a new topic, those are all the things I do. I go to the library. I take a look at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I talk to my independent booksellers. And I just look and see what's out there and how well it's doing. Mm-hmm. And that might give you an idea. You're never going to, nobody publishes, hey, I sold 5,000 copies of this book. You're not going to find that. Mm-hmm. But it'll give you an idea of what's popular and what's not.
Mm-hmm. And again, going back to something that we've talked a lot about here in this series, what you're talking about now is doing market research.
Yep.
And people hear market research, and it's like, that's like business. I'm an author.
You're in a business. This includes includes everything. It includes marketing. It includes sales. It includes writing. It includes writing copy. It includes making videos and book trailers. All of those things are now under the author hat. Mm-hmm. And doing appearances and setting up your own blog tours. Like, you are a business person. If I didn't have to do all of that, oh my gosh, I would have so much more time to write.
But and that's one of the reasons that you are so successful, is that you are taking care of those other tasks. You know, you have a very lively, engaging school show, very lively, engaging presentation that can be in a school or with a symphony orchestra in a park yes. in New York City.
Yes.
You know, you know how to market. You're doing the market research. You're able to be vulnerable enough to hear, oh, the history of car safety's pretty damn boring. And you don't take that personally. You say, okay, yeah, maybe it is, and what can we do? And you talk with your husband, and you're taking a walk, and it's like, yo, genius.
Yes.
You can do this.
And that's kind of, I tell people that being an author is harder than you think it is. You need to have a thick skin, like everything else, but you need to be able to do a billion different things at once. I've also done talks on, do I need to have a platform, right? So I'm not, I'm not just, quote unquote, an author, right? Like, I'm a STEAM advocate. I have a podcast, Solve It for Kids, which you and I started together and is doing very, very well. And I also started STEM Tuesday, which is how I originally met you. And I used to come on here and talk about STEM Tuesday. We have STEAM Team Books, which is a book promo group. So I even have a 501c3 nonprofit for STEM literacy called Kid Literacy. So you can do all of these things. You don't have to do everything I do, but this is a way to build your brand and kind of get your name out there for different things. So you're not always just like, hey, buy my book. Mm-hmm. Hey, it's like, meet me here. Come be on my podcast. All of these different things. So that's another way to approach the business, and also to show your passion to editors that you're really serious about what you do and you're willing to promote your books in many different ways, not just by doing bookstores and all that kind of stuff, which is great, but you're willing to meet the public where they are. Yeah. Yeah. And you do that with this podcast.
Yeah. Well, giving voice to authors is something that I love and I'm feel so blessed to be able to do. And one of the things you just mentioned is, meeting people where they are. Most people think, oh, I have to do a book signing in a bookstore. And yeah, that's the way to reach people who go to bookstores.
Right.
But I'm guessing that the majority of people in the world don't go to bookstores.
To buy books, probably.
Yeah. They're out there. And if you can reach the families who aren't hanging out at Barnes & Noble or the independent bookstores, and that may not be buying 5 or 10 books a month, but they meet Jennifer Swanson and they hear her on a podcast and they're like, hey, she's really kind of cool, and I love what she's talking about, the crash test dummies and all this other kind of stuff, and maybe I'll buy a book or two of hers.
Yeah. Well, and all of it helps. Now, marketing. You can spend $10,000 over here and get nothing, right? Oh, well, over here, you just send out like 5 emails and all of a sudden you've connected with the most important person for the rest of your career, right? So that's the thing that I think a lot of authors struggle with is, where do I put my time and money? There is no answer. Do what you're comfortable with. Don't feel that you have to be on 8 different social medias if you're only good at Twitter. If you're good at Twitter, then stay on Twitter and be really good at Twitter. Same thing if you're on Instagram. So you got to find your focus, and then it takes a while to figure out where the people are that are buying your books. I've discovered a lot of people buy my books through Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that means that I have a very robust website. I have videos of myself, which my rule is once you've videoed yourself, like never watch yourself. Never. But anyway, there are videos on my website for that talk about my books, that have activities, that have science activities that kids can do, that have book trailers, all that fun stuff. And people know when they buy your books that they can go find you there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you'd be surprised. Like, I get a lot of school visit requests just through my website, people I've never met.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another thing you mentioned in talking about where to spend your resources, that's another thing we've talked about in the series is, the folks at Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and they don't just sit there and go, oh, here's 10 grand, buy that, here's 5 grand, do that. And they sit down and they say, how much do we have?
Yes.
What's the best way that we can use this to sit down and create a business plan?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, if I could give a tip to new authors, one of the things that we authors have figured out that's somewhat successful is getting together in a promo group. Mm-hmm. Because now it's not just you talking about your book, you're with 15 other people or whatever, which is why I started STEAM Team Books, because there were picture book promo groups and they're middle grade, and I was like, there's no STEM books. So if teachers or parents or librarians want to find books that have STEM and STEAM themes, where are they going to go? And we do fiction and nonfiction of all levels. But then you kind of have a power, and it's not all on you going, oh my gosh, I've only posted twice on Twitter this week. I should be posting 3 times. I don't have time, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And you're also not just posting, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book.
Yes. You're posting about other people's books, mm-hmm. and giving your listener, your followers, other information besides you just hammering them with your own.
Yeah. Well, I really love this. You and I, we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but is there anything you want to kind of wrap up, tie this up with a pretty bow?
I just want to leave, very quickly, I want to leave everybody with this thought. So we talked about books that you love and how to, sell them. I want challenge you to write a book you didn't think you could write. So, and that is my Footprints Across the Planet book. So I'm known for middle grade YA books that have 12,000, 30,000 words. Footprints Across the Planet had 150 words. I look at it as the circle, right? I couldn't write a nonfiction picture book, but here I am almost 15 years later, having finally written what I think that author, Elaine Landau, would be proud of. It's a nonfiction picture book. Mm-hmm. But to my utter shock, reviews have been coming in, one from our friend Rajani mm-hmm. Laraka, about how lyrically beautiful it was. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, lyrically, poetic? I'm sorry, Jen, you know me. I'm not a poetry person.
Maybe we're going to have to make you the princess of poetry.
Please don't. That's too much. But my point is you never know what kind of book you have in you. Mm-hmm. So give it a try. You might surprise yourself, and it might turn out to be something really, really beautiful. And I look at that book, and I still am a bit stunned. It turned out it's just a gorgeous book. But I'm like, I wrote that. Wow. The one that wrote about crash test dummies and really engineering and physics. I wrote this. So give it a try.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, you mentioned your website. Where can people go to see that website to not only find out more about you, but maybe steal some ideas? Did I say steal some ideas? Steal some ideas. That's what we do.
Yes. So my website is jenniferswansonbooks.com. And if you want to check out the Solve It for Kids podcast that Jen and I started together, you can find us on solveitforkids.com.
Awesome. We've had a great time talking about write what you love and can sell with our Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, Jennifer Swanson. Hey, Jen, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Jen. It's always amazing.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Stanetta Anthony. Stanetta is returning to the show to celebrate Ella Learns to Dance. That's the next episode of the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, our dean of all things STEM and STEAM, the Admiral of Adventure, Jennifer Swanson. Please be sure to check out her website and all of her amazing books. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Saley, Stephanie Davila, Will Cheever. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.